This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jan22. Welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe on this day. And on this day, January 22nd, 1989, Miami hosted another Super Bowl. Yesterday, I talked about Super Bowl 13. Now we go to Super Bowl 23. And, Miami 10 years ago hosted Super Bowl 13. It was a classic. Well, finally, Miami got another Super Bowl this year for 1989, and it was a classic. Because the Bengals and the Niners were battling each other tooth and nail. The Niners had a un-Niners like mark of 10-6, while the Bengals were 12-4. Head into this thing. So yeah, and this was the first time Miami hosted the Super Bowl at Joe Robbie Stadium, which was a decent stadium. Of course, it wasn't meant for baseball until the Marlins got the expansion franchise. So there were a lot of people that wanted the Super Bowl and all that. So this was actually the last East Coast Super Bowl that began under daylight. For the Niners, this would be huge because 3 years, the last time they went to the Super Bowl, they took care of the Miami Dolphins in Dan Marino. They did make the playoffs in the 3 seasons between Super Bowl 19 and 23, but they fumbled it. And the last season's lost to the Vikings, which was a shock because the Niners were 13-2 in that stretch run season. It was a low point for Montana. San Fran managed to win 10 games and named the number 2 playoff seed. The funny thing is the Rams and Saints were also 10-6. Anyway, we had the Montana young quarterback controversy start. All that. The Niners were 6-5 at one point, but Montana did get 4 out of 5 wins, so made it 10-6. Montana would throw for almost 3,000 yards. Jerry Rice would be the receiving leader. Roger Craig would be the running back star. Named the NFL Offensive Player of the Year. Not MVP, but Offensive Player of the Year. Tom Rathman was good. John Taylor, second-year receiver, looked pretty good with his plays and all that. And if you're asking, no, this is not the season that John Taylor burst through 2 90-plus yard touchdown receptions against the Rams on Monday Night Football. That's the next season. The Niners had some great defense. Ronnie Lott, Eric Wright, John Fuller, and Tim McKayer in the defensive backfield. Charles Haley, Michael Carter, and Pierce Holt were sacking people left, right, and center. The Bengals were a team on the rebound. They were 4-11. It was nasty. Boomer Esiason was feuding with Bengals management, but they worked everything out, and he put up over 3,500 yards and was named MVP. Since he had Eddie Brown, a great receiver, doing his job with Tim McKee and Ronnie Holman, also as receiving threats, Ickey Woods came out of effing nowhere to get through with the Ickey Shuffle. James Brooks was a good running back, not the guy from The Simpsons, and the offensive line was huge. Max Montoya and Anthony Munoz were great. Tim Crumry was a great defensive tackle, was alongside Jason Buck, and Louis Phillips was a good person. So, anyway, the Bengals would take care of the Seattle Seahawks in the divisional round 21-13, and then beat Buffalo on home turf in the AFC title game 21-10. Funny how the Bills and the Bengals always seem to bump into each other, and they're in the divisional round this year. So anyway, yeah, that's huge. What they could do and all that. Anyway, the Niners crushed the Vikings, got revenge for the Vikings coming into San Francisco and shocking the 13-2 team. They were 10-6, but they crushed the Vikings 34-9, and the Bears 28-3. So they only gave up 12 points. And the funny thing was, their game against the Bears, that was actually a road game. I thought the Niners won on home turf, but no, they won at Soldier Field, and the Bears could only score 3 points on the Niners, which was weird. In fact, the Niners were the first road team since the 1980 Rams to win an NFC title game. So the Niners were really heavily favored because Joe Montana did what he could. Esiason was also having a problem with his throwing shoulder. So yeah, this was huge. Unfortunately, Cincy suffered a massive blow, as Bob Costas would tell the pregame audience on NBC that Stanley Wilson was caught using cocaine in his hotel room. And because this was the third violation of the drug policy, he was gone for life. And the Bengals had to leave Stanley Wilson off their roster. That was huge and all that. So the Niners would wear the red uniforms, Bengals would have to wear white. Unfortunately, though, there was a little bit of problems. Miami actually had been in a problem with rioting because a Hispanic police officer shot and killed a speeding black motorcyclist. And there was a lot of problems. Over $1 million of damage was done, and rumors were that the Super Bowl was going to be moved to Tampa in the wake of this. But it actually prompted the NFL to take a look at the league's hiring minorities and the lack of black coaches. So that's it. So NBC got to do their thing. With Dick Enberg, and Merlin Olsen being the guys and all that. So NBC did a lot of things. In fact, there was actually an event called the Diet Pepsi Talent Challenge at the Miami Seaquarium, which was kind of crappy and all that. Why NBC did that? If you follow Jaguar Gator 9 on YouTube, you'll know why that pregame thing was kind of sucky. So, anything. So, anyway, it was huge what they could do. So, yeah. So, they worked huge and all that. So, it was big. Jack Buck and Hank Strand would do the radio work. So, anyway, the coin toss featured some former Miami players, and the game started at 5 o'clock. This was the last outdoor Super Bowl to start earlier than 6 p.m. So, anyway, it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, injuries would hurt both sides of the field in the first quarter. Niners tackle Steve Wallace had a broken ankle. But the worst part was that later on in the first quarter, Tim Crumry, trying to make a play, the defensive lineman, twisted his ankle nearly 180 degrees, shattering 2 bones in his left leg. The funny thing is, Crumry would actually make one of the biggest injury comebacks in NFL history, and come back to play. What was it? 4 years after? I wonder how long it was. Yep, after a 15-inch steel rod was implanted to stabilize the leg, Crumry was allowed to come back, and he played till 1994. Wow, that's amazing. You don't want to watch the replay of that. Mike Kofer kicked a field goal to make it 3-0. So anyway, Kofer went for a 19-yard field goal. Now, to put it in perspective, the ball was at the Cincy 2. In the NFL, you add 17 yards to a field goal attempt to make sure it crosses the line, because the goalposts are at the back of the end zone, which is 10 yards. There's a 10-yard end zone in the NFL, and you give 7 yards for, I can't remember what it was. Kofer attempted the 19-yard field goal, and he missed. How did he miss that? Randy Cross, yes, that Randy Cross made a mistake with the snap. So now it was a 19-yard field goal, the shortest in history. So anyway, he did what he could and all that. Jim Breach kicked a 34-yard field goal. It was 3-3. It was, in fact, the first time in Super Bowl history that a game had been tied going into the half, which was amazing. It took 23 attempts, and the lowest halftime score since Super Bowl IX, when the Steelers were up 2-0 on the Vikings because of a safety. So anyway, both teams would exchange field goals, 6-6. It was like, looks like this will be the first Super Bowl not to have a touchdown after 3 quarters. But after Kofor's 32-yard field goal, 6-6, Stanford Jennings at the 7-yard line caught the ball and then somehow ran straight up the middle and burst out of the pack into the open field. Terry Greer for the Niners thought he got him, but he tripped him out the one, but Jennings fell into the end zone, forward progression, touchdown. And yes, Terry Greer actually was a star for the Toronto Argonauts back in the 80s. Anyway, Stanford Jennings was only the second player in history to have a kickoff return for a touchdown, joining Fulton Walker of the Dolphins. But he did that against Washington in 83. The funny thing was, the next 3 Super Bowls at Joe Robbie / Hard Rock Stadium, players would duplicate that feat. Andre Coleman had a kickoff return for a touchdown for the Chargers in Super Bowl 29, but they got their asses handed to them. Tim Dwight did it for the Falcons against the Broncos in John Elway's last game in Super Bowl 33, and Devin Hester returned the opening kickoff for the touchdown for the Bears against the Colts. But, ironically enough, the Colts won. But that's the funny thing now. Every time that a kickoff return for a touchdown happened, in Miami, that team would lose. The Niners did get a touchdown play as Montana would throw to Rice and then for a good play, and then got a 13-yard touchdown pass to tie it at 13. Kofor unfortunately kicked the ball out of bounds, which meant that the Bengals would get the ball at their 35. Well, it's at the 40 nowadays, because one such example is John Casey's miss in the Super Bowl in 2004. Anyhow, Kofor missed a 49-yard field goal wide right. Not the first time not the last time we would hear wide right in the Super Bowl. Anyway, Bridge would kick the field goal to make it 16-13. So the Niners were up to the 15 with 3:10 left. Sadly, though, they got penalized for illegal block. So that means half the distance to the 8-yard line. So 92 yards. So Montana would have to lead a 92-yard drive in 3 minutes to potentially win the game with a touchdown or tie the game with a field goal. Joe Montana actually pointed into the stadium crowd to calm his teammates, saying, "Hey, isn't that John Candy?" And it worked, because John Candy was doing the pregame thing for NBC. It was Montana's Joe Cool reputation. So the drive was huge and all that. Montana actually threw a couple of completions to the middle of the field, one to Roger Craig, one to John Frank. So Montana, bit by bit, gave Rice and Craig the ball, and it worked. So with 39 seconds left, Montana threw a calm pass to John Taylor, not to Jerry Rice, who set the record for receptions with 11. It was John Taylor, the second-year man, who got the touchdown. Niners were up 20-16. Unfortunately, though, the Bengals could not do anything. So they tried their best and came up short by 4 points. So Chris Collinsworth, the key Bengals player, that commentator, he retired after the game for the Bengals. So anyway, the Niners were the 6th team out of 23 at that time to win the Super Bowl against a team that with a better regular season record. And the Niners were the first team since the 16-game schedule was instituted in 1978 to win the Super Bowl with only 10 games. In fact, their 6 regular season losses were the most ever by a Super Bowl champion until the Giants broke that mark, losing 7 times. And no, that wasn't the 2008 Miracle team. It was the 2012 champions. So that's what happened. So the game was started at 24 Celsius with high winds of up to 30 miles per hour. 5:18 was the start time. Yeah. Bill Walsh decided to retire from the NFL after this moment. He announced it on NBC. Funny thing was, NBC did that broadcast, and then Bill Walsh became a color commentator for NBC. Then he went to Stanford for a few years and was with the Niners for a while. Yeah, Randy Cross and Chris Collinsworth both retired as players after the game and became broadcasters. This was the last time Pete Rozelle would preside over a Super Bowl as commissioner. It was Paul Tagliabue who would be the guy who would replace Pete Rozelle. But Pete Rozelle's game-changing ways are always welcome and all that. The Bengals would not get to the Super Bowl until this past year, 2022. And NFL.com said that this is the greatest Super Bowl of all time. In 2019, the NFL called this the 19th greatest game in history. But yeah, it was amazing, especially Joe Montana's play and all that. He was just awesome in that game, and Joe Cool indeed. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.